Good evening, everybody. If I go on to the welcome to this evening, the Housing and Environment Open Scrutiny Committee for Thursday, the 13th of March 2014. We're actually in the main council chamber due to the flooding committee panel still taking up the other room, but it is being scaled back considerably. If I go on to fire evacuation procedures, there are absolutely and clearly no fire alarm scheduled for this evening, so any fire alarm is genuine. Please evacuate the building immediately. Fire exit located at the rear of this room. Go down the back of the stairs and meet in the War Memorial Park. Thank you. Webcasting of meeting, to remind everybody that we are being webcast. It's correct to say live, isn't it? We are being webcast and it is live, yes. 3, to receive apologies for absence. We have none. Good. 4, resignations and replacements. We have none. 5, declaration of conflict of interest or whipping decisions. My colleague.
Thank you, Chair. It's just for completeness, really. Just to state that I am a landlord and we do have a landlord-related paper, but I don't believe there's any pecuniary interest or conflict of interest with that.
Councillor Leakes.
Ditto.
And rather than say ditto, I'll also declare that I am a landlord, but I don't see a problem with these papers as they are. Councillor Peach.
Ditto.
Thank you. Item 6, urgent items. There's nothing. Item 7, to confirm the minutes. Can we have a general nod of assent that we... Councillor James.
Thank you. It's on page 8 of 49C. It was resolved that the officers develop a charter of standards for this committee. I just wondered, have we got any feedback on when that will be and some timetable to that?
Can we please just stick to the clarity of the minutes? Are the minutes correct? Because can we sort that out first, and then I will come back and let the officers answer that question. Can we please, do we consider the minutes correct, or can I please sign them? Thank you. Right. Would you like to actually address that question? Thank you.
Yeah, we haven't got a firm date for that yet, but I can check and come back to you in a written form. The next, we haven't got a committee in May or June, there'll be one in July, so I would anticipate July at the earliest, but I will confirm for you afterwards.
Thank you. Item 8, member and public participation upon issues contained within the agenda. We do have Councillor Tilbury and Councillor Harvey sat at the back. Thank you, and thank you for giving me notice, Councillor Tilbury. And if we go on to item 9, oh sorry, well, we also have from Sentinel, 2 gentlemen, thank you very much for turning up. A Julian Chan and a Mike Shepherd, very, very much welcome. Separate to this, because we have public people coming from Sentinel, when we come to the order of the papers, if we could take paper C before paper B. So we'll continue through the agenda first, because we do have people for that paper. Item 9, standing invitation to relevant portfolio holders. I'm looking at the end of the table here.
I'll just say it's part of the introduction to the paper.
Thank you very much. You will speak later on. Item 10, referrals from other committees, none, and 11, Cabinet, none. We now move on to the meat of the meeting, which is item 12 and 13. As I said earlier, if everybody's happy, please can we take item 13 first, which is paper C, which is the social, rented and council housing paper. I will now ask the portfolio holder to introduce it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is a report by officers on the reporting on the various points raised in a motion to full council on the 11th of July. I just want to make two or three very quick points. Firstly, to thank the officers for getting this done. I know they've all been very, very involved in other activities through the flooding, and to get anything done that isn't been flooding related has been a real challenge over the last couple of months. So well done to the officers for producing this report for us. I would recommend to committee that they note the bit of the recommendation that says that I anticipate you'll have a lot to say about this. You may want some more questions answered, but I would encourage 2.2 that you don't try and reinvent another wheel, but take this forward through the Commissioning Outcomes Group, which is already going to be looking at things like this and will involve both members and officers and our external partners. So it will be a very effective way of taking these things forward. I would also encourage committee to pay particular attention to 3.4, which sets out the position of the Homes and Communities Agency, which is that almost entirely any new money, and there is significant new money still available centrally, will go into the provision of houses for affordable rent and not social rent. And I'm sure people will have things to say on whether what they feel about that, but it is a reality. And if we want the money, we've got to play by the rules. So please don't shoot ourselves in the foot. And thirdly, paragraphs 311 to 319 set out all the different things we're doing as a council to try and use the council's resources to promote the provision of more affordable housing in the borough. With 316 mentions the recent decision in relation to Chinham House. 318 says that we were negotiating with Sentinel on spending the rest of the affordable housing reserve, 634,000, so that they could purchase around 17 units to be used as temporary accommodation. We would put the people in them so that we didn't have to put them in bed and breakfast. Pleased to announce, as probably many of you realise, that we were able to reach agreement with Sentinel this week on that. We will be bringing it to Cabinet next week as an emergency item so that it can go to full council before we all take 2 months off and play at elections. So we don't want people in bed and breakfast unnecessarily. We're going to bring this to full council in March. So that's, thank you to Sentinel for, and I know there's been quite a lot of work, both their side and our side, to hammer out the details of this, but it will provide potentially around 17 new homes, existing homes. We don't have to wait for them to be built. They'll be bought up on the open market, and we can start putting people in houses rather than bed and breakfast. And I hope you'll all regard that as good news. Thank you.
Thank you. If we now look at the whole paper, basically we're going to take questions and comment all in one. We'll try and manage the meeting and get through it that way. The officer would like to say a few things.
Thank you, Chair. Just so the committee knows, we've got our commissioning colleagues with us here today. They're here really to answer any questions you might have in relation to commissioning as it fits with the paper before you. If you've got any wider questions about commissioning, they're happy to speak to you offline, but they're here today specifically about the use of commissioning and this paper here. And we've also got our colleagues from Sentinel who are here to answer any questions that you may have and to give their perspective on some of the issues before you. I should also say Sovereign were invited to attend this evening, but unfortunately they were unable to make it. They have offered a private meeting with anybody to go through the issues in the paper, should anybody wish to take them up on that. And the final thing I wanted to say was really, Councillor Golding has talked about some of the work we've done using council assets and so on to deliver affordable housing. The key issue that hasn't really been addressed there, but has been flagged up in the paper, is that of affordability. Now, the issues around affordability have yet to be answered, in as much as what is affordability, affordability to who. So those are the issues before us, and I'm going to hand over to Di just to talk a little bit more about those issues.
Good evening, members. Sorry.
Can I just ask, is there not a microphone in front? Because otherwise you won't be seen on the webcast.
Okay, good evening, members. My input in this has been to respond to the issues on affordability. As Tracy said in her introduction, the issues of affordability are not yet entirely settled. The updated SHMAR paper will come to Planning and Infrastructure Committee in the summer of this year. I wanted to go through very briefly the Appendix 1, which is the Appendix 2, which is the appendix to this paper, which outlines the affordability work we've done to date in updating that work that was presented to committee last year. There is one correction that I just wanted to point out, and that's on page 32 of 49. At the top of page 32, it says, included below, however, is a simple table showing. The reference to the table is actually on page 39 of 49. So that paragraph just refers to the table on page 49 under the sensitivity testing. And similarly, the last paragraph of page 32, it says some discussion points are outlined below. Well, that should read in the section on sensitivity testing at page 39. So just to clarify that. As I say, the work in Appendix 2 does update what has already been shown in the SHMAR, just rolling it forward to a new year, to 2013. In addition to that, however, there's some sensitivity testing that we've undertaken, looking at affordability thresholds not just for a third of gross income, but also a quarter of gross income and 40% of gross income. Because I think as we move forward in this debate, we need to take some decisions as to how we measure affordability. And I'm making a recommendation that we do actually follow 33% as an affordability ratio, and that is something that's obviously open to discussion. And I have included in Appendix 2 some debating points around that. The work that will be presented to committee in the summer will set out to answer the questions that are posed in paragraph 4.5 of the report. That's on page 23. And those questions are, should there be a general measure applicable to all household groups when considering affordability, or whether there should be a specific measure in respect of particular property sizes, types and household groups? Is there a particular priority household group on which to focus? So far our modelling has been done based on incomes across the housing register. Should we be focusing in on a particular household group or an income group within that? Is there a particular priority income band for which rent should meet an affordability test? And is there a particular property size or type where affordability is more or less of an issue? In addition to answering these questions, the SHMAR in summer of 2014 will also be an update of what was presented last year. So that includes affordability testing for all tenures, including intermediate and shared ownership, and through to full market housing. In specific response to this motion, however, what we're also going to be looking at is the affordability gap. So rather than looking at how affordable are rents, looking at it from the income perspective and asking the question, what can people on certain incomes or households on certain incomes actually afford? Then looking at the rents that are charged across the borough and determining if there is a gap, where the gap opens and where the gap actually closes. There is some further work to be done, as I say, for the summer of 2014. There's some more work to be done on exploring different income data sources, which I can talk more about. But in addition to that, in the SHMAR in 2014, what we'll also be including is some implications and policy recommendations for you to consider. I'm happy to take any questions on what I've just said or on Appendix 2 as it's presented tonight.
Before I take the councillors sitting down, we do have two visiting councillors. I believe it's normal procedure to invite you to come up now and speak. Would one of you like to come forward? They're actually, I believe they haven't come to speak. They've come to listen and answer questions, should there be any questions, and hopefully participate in that way. Please come forward.
Thank you, Chair. I think the motion and where we've come from on this so far is that we believe there is no doubt that there is an affordability and an affordable housing crisis in Basingstoke. I think the evidence that you've got in front of you this evening details how many people from a variety of incomes, single people, couples and families, are affected by the affordability gap that we see. Now, our motion was clear, and I'd like to thank the officers for the report, the very detailed report. But our central point, and what I hope the committee will take on board this evening, was that we want action. Delivering just 44 affordable homes or 77 affordable homes over the last 2 years isn't good enough. Without the regeneration of the deck maisonettes in our ward that Sentinel are running through, that trend would continue, and indeed, even then it's just 124 units. It's not the 300 that we were looking for in the context of the target. Now, I respect the officer's reasoning for wanting to take this to a COG. But in my honest view, and in my opinion, you COG if you want to, because as far as we're concerned, it's the action that we're looking for. Now, waiting until November to have a roundtable with partners to produce a way forward, covering the breadth and scope of the issues proposed for the discussion, that will then go into a commissioning process, is not the action that we're looking for. I want to see appraisals and options looked at with partners addressing different vehicles for delivery, looking at how we can actually get houses built on the ground in a tangible policy. Now, we've been debating this for as long as we've been debating the local plan, which is for years. We've been round the houses on this one. We've got capital monies available. We have land available. We have good partners willing to work with us who are already doing a significant amount in the town. And we have an opportunity to do something. Now, while we procrastinate, other councils like Winchester, Oxford, Woking, they're all on the ground. They are all out there delivering as we speak. I've met Lambeth, I've met Oxford, I've met other councils around the country who are getting on with the job of delivering homes to meet their
That's the
local
normal
need.
time up, but if everybody's agreed, we'll allow you this, the double time.
Thank
because
you.
I think this is relevant.
I appreciate that, Chair. It's the move of the motion. I do appreciate that. So why is there urgency? Why are we talking about this in terms of urgency? Single people have got lower income. 75% of incomes below £15,000 according to the report. 40% of families have incomes under £15,000 on our register. Couples of incomes of an average range of £20,000 to £25,000. So there is a very serious income divide in Basingstoke. The report says that 57% of households in the housing register have incomes below £15,000. Over a third of them, over a third of families and couples cannot actually afford entry-level rents, according to the evidence before us so far. And the important point as well, Chair, to bear in mind that the proportion of those families and those people who are earning less than £20,000 has increased from 2011 at 21% to 2013 at 26%. Now, that's a 5% increase in just 2 years, and that is a significant figure that we need to take note of. So what I'm arguing, to sum up, Chair, is that we have got to do something about it, and the evidence speaks for itself. On the one hand, the administration are bringing forward proposals, as the Cabinet member has set out, to urgently spend monies, and we welcome that. That's been in our manifesto and other colleagues' manifestos for some time. We welcome that. But the bigger issue here doesn't need to be thrown into the long grass of commissioning. What we'd like to see is some very firm, concrete proposals working with our partners that will deliver something, not have to wait 18 months or 2 years for a COG process to work its way through this council's corridors to achieve really what people need to see. Because there is an affordability crisis, there is an affordable housing crisis that's here and now in Basingstoke, and I'm really urging you to do something about it, because we've got the means to do so. Thank you for giving me the extra time, Chair. I do appreciate it.
Thank you. Would Councillor Tilbury like to come forward?
Oh, thank you very much, Chair. Yes, I mean, yeah, I'd agree with much of what Councillor Harvey's just said. I mean, this is a very good report, as usual, as we come to expect from Di. I mean, and it does really show the issues around affordability, because that's the real issue here. Most people who live in this borough, the youngsters who are trying to get houses, can't afford to buy them, and they seem to be struggling to have any hope of getting one on the housing list. That's getting worse and worse by the day. The COG process, and we're looking at November 2014, that's 9 months away. It's just too long. You know, I mean, we need to be far more proactive with this. And I've got an old press cutting here from a few years ago from what this is how we used to do it in 1970. Kingsley and Whitchurch Rural District Council decided at a special housing committee meeting to build approximately 50 houses in addition to 160 already under construction or planned, which is more, that's the council, that was a third of the size of this one. The committee was told there were 472 applicants for houses on the waiting list, 285 for general needs. Now that was considered such a crisis that they had to get on and build houses. We've got 7,000 on the list now. I mean, and that's the difference. And we got a lot of things wrong in the 70s, like flared trousers for men, but you know, we were actually very good at building houses and getting that sort of thing done. So we need to be more proactive, and that means building them ourselves. We need to do that. We are lucky. We have got some good housing association partners in Sentinel. I can't say much for the other two that operate in my ward, and I understand from the report that you may be the partner on Overton Hill, which I look forward to, because from what I've seen, you seem to be far better than Sovereign, or as for Affinity Sutton, where they're even worse. But you know, we just need to get on and do something and build houses. You know, we keep commissioning groups. I went to the last one, but there was only myself and Councillor James there because it had been cancelled because no one forgot to tell us. I mean, we just need to get on and do something constructive. Let's stop having meetings about this and just get on and do something. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. We have been reminded that we have two experts in the commissioning here. We have Sentinel over here, and we have the officers and the portfolio holder. So it might be more appropriate if we actually started with any questions just to clarify the paper. Councillor James.
As you can guess, I've got lots of questions, but my first question is in relation to Appendix 1, is the table of all of the developments proposed. Is this, is this an assumption that we're going to be developing 40% affordable units on those sites? Is my first question.
On which sites in particular?
So in relation to all of the sites on Appendix 1, what we're saying at the bottom is that it tells us that in 2012-13 we're only going to deliver 45, then it says 77, and it goes on. Is the assumption in relation to year 4 or 5, is it that we're going to be delivering 40%?
Could I ask the portfolio holder to speak here?
Because I've discussed this with officers quite a lot, these are the actual figures in the planning permissions for the ones that have got planning permission, and the ones in the applications for the ones that have applications. So I think so it's not an assumption of 40%, it is the actual numbers for which there is permission. And I was going to say in relation to Councillor Harvey, perhaps, because, I mean, the figures at the bottom of the total, 525, 472, 45, we won't get quite to those figures. We've done various ways of discounting them to work out, because something will always fall by the wayside, something will be slightly slower. But I am absolutely confident that by 2015-16, we will be comfortably over 300, unless the economy falls off a cliff again or something like that, or we have, you know, floods for a whole year. But these are realistic figures based on what is actually in planning permissions and what the developers tell us about the speed at which they're planning to develop.
So can they come back in relation to viability, as we've seen, can they come back and say, in relation to that planning application, that it's now not viable to do that? Are you guaranteeing us that each one of those sites that we've got on the left-hand side are going to be delivering 40% affordable?
Pressed it. Okay, sorry. They have a legal right to come back and may do so. I hope we'll give them a very robust answer if they do. But as I've said, I think, you know, for 2015-16, the total at the bottom is 525. Even if some of that doesn't get delivered, we should still be comfortably over 300 in my view. So I'm not promising we'll get 525. I am saying we should be back to above our target by that year, unless there is some totally unexpected catastrophe.
James?
I raise the point because on average, and we're using averages here in relation to the net total, we've only delivered 13% of our 40% over the last 2 years, and I want a guarantee that we are, that this is a target, and it's not just a projection, that this is a definite target.
I think I put it the other way around. It is a projection. It's not a target that we may or may not hit. It is a best realistic projection based on discussion, looking at actual planning permissions and discussions with the developers as to what we expect to happen if all goes well. And I say I'm allowing a bit of a discount for not everything going well, some slippages, but it'll still should be comfortably over. The last couple of years have just been abnormal because there have been no big sites coming through. There's been tail ends of things, and when you get to the tail end of things, the proportion actually built in any given year may or may not be the 40%. But going forward, when people are starting on new sites, we are confident as to what we're expecting to have delivered. And as I say, I know officers check these things regularly, and I get them to report to me quarterly.
Mr. James?
Can I ask, one of the issues, maybe I can ask Sentinel this, in relation to one of the issues that was raised by Councillor Golding, and it was in about HCC 3.4. It says, it talks about social rents will not be funded by HCC. Is there a way of this borough funding? So if HCC are only going to fund affordable rents, how can we as a borough deliver a rent that is more in line with the needs of people on the housing register? A target rent, we may call it, or we would like to call it that, or a social rent, something that people can afford in line with the evidence within this paper. Is it something that we could do?
Please, yeah, if you're happy to answer, please do.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, the paper is correct. The Homes and Communities Agency will not fund social rent. They see affordable rent as the priority for delivery. But in terms of how Basingstoke may wish to kind of utilise their resources, there's nothing to prevent the authority from funding social rent or a rent that's perhaps, you know, has greater subsidy than affordable rent typically requires. So typically that would be by way of a capital grant or use of land assets that then subsidise the development process to allow the properties to be delivered. So because the HCA isn't undertaking it, there's nothing to prevent the local authority from doing so.
Two other people have asked, Councillor Day and Councillor...
From that, it's just a follow. So just to be clear then, so we would get the grant from the HCC for the affordable rent. We'd still get that, would we? And then what we could do is use money. How would it work? How could we ensure that we build houses? I'd like you to be much clearer with us. How can we build housing that people can afford to live in?
Yeah, you wouldn't be able to top up, in essence, the grant that the HCA would provide. The HCA would provide it on the basis that those homes would be let at affordable rent. So you would have to fund the whole rented provision there. So typically that would be a higher grant rate than we currently see for affordable rent, because obviously the increased rental revenue that is received allows for the grant rate to be significantly lower than when we were providing social rent, you know, some 3 or 4 years ago. I think grant rates have gone from typically around about £55,000-60,000 per social rented home delivered to around about 20 to 25,000 for affordable rented homes. So it would be at the higher level that you would more likely have to fund to deliver social rented housing.
Do you have any question on this?
It was just really, how else? I mean, I just want you to explore with us how else, because obviously we've asked you to come along today. The issue is, in relation to the motion, how could we deliver a model or an accommodation that would meet that need for the evidence within this report? As an expert in housing, could you give us some of your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have, you know, two main routes primarily. The first one is capital subsidy that's invested to deliver a rented home in perpetuity, so it's available for the medium and long term. The other
main route to generate supply would be by use of the council's assets, and as we've undertaken on some of our regeneration activities in the town, the land being put in at a subsidised value is in essence then treated as a grant subsidy by us in taking forward the development. So if we haven't got to make a capital receipt, a payment for the land that comes in, we can treat that as subsidy towards delivering a cheaper rented product. And those would be, I think, the two main ways from our point of view as to how you could deliver a more subsidised rented product, and that would free you from the restrictions of the HCA and the kind of more centralised government funding.
Could I come in here, please? I don't know what figure you take as a normal average per acre per hectare of developable land. If you could give us two figures, what the average normal figure would be and what the figure would be that you would need to be able to deliver what Councillor James has asked. Could you just put some figures on it, please?
It's very difficult in terms of land values because it varies so significantly, across the town, but certainly across the district. I think in terms of a grant per home to provide a social rented property, we'd be looking, I would have thought, in the region of about £50,000 to £60,000 per property. And an affordable rented grant is typically half that, £20,000 to £30,000.
So please bear with me. If it was £50,000 per home, and if we put 15 per acre, would that be about right? Am I correct on that?
Yeah, broadly.
So 50,000 times 15 is what the subsidy per acre the council would have to do to give to you to be able to do what you want. Just roughly.
Yeah, roughly. Yeah, I mean it would multiply by each of the homes that were provided. So.
And is 15 an acre a good figure?
I think generally for a kind of housing-led scheme, yes, it's about right. Obviously, if you're in a town centre location, there's more apartments, then it would typically be higher. But yeah, broadly for a housing scheme, that would be about correct.
Is that clarified it?
Following on from that, in relation to bringing that down, if we were to give land as as part of that, does that change that calculation? So, and what's your, in relation to you as a housing association, are you able to put money into this? So if we were to look at a site that we had in the town to say, we can offer land, does that then change that calculation?
I guess in essence, the kind of subsidy gap, the grant gap is the same, because whether it's generated by or provided by free land or money kind of depends on the sites and how it comes forward. The gap in essence between what we can deliver and what we when we assess a scheme is viable will still be broadly the same, but that can be funded through the use of land, if I've understood the question correctly. So that would mean on most sites, if we were providing half of a social rented and half of another tenure to cross subsidise it. Typically we've used shared ownership, part rent, part buy tenures in the past alongside our social rent. There's an element of cross subsidy that's generated from the construction and sale of the shared ownership homes that goes towards funding the social rent. And again, the gap could then either be land coming in at nil cost or a grant top up. But the number would vary on a site-by-site basis, but in essence, we could work with officers to look at a selection, perhaps of typical sites, and what the subsidy gap may be, and we could take that forward.
I don't wish to labour this, but could I just clarify? It's very roughly £750,000 an acre subsidy you would need to do that. Supposing this council seriously thought about that, is there any legal mechanism to say that this council, the ratepayers of this borough, would effectively still have £750,000 an acre asset value in that system? Because we have to think about the whole of the borough, not just the people living in those houses. Has it been done before, and is there a system for it?
Yeah, I mean, typically when we've looked at subsidy that goes into a scheme, there is a repayment mechanism, in essence, should the properties be sold or be purchased by the resident living in those homes. So in that point, there could be a mechanism in place then where that grant could be repaid if the property was lost. But in essence, the subsidy works on a kind of perpetual basis that it's put in, it lowers the rent for the current resident and the future residents, and in essence is available for the long term.
Thank you. Councillor Day, you had some questions.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm looking at page 39 of 49 and the table there, and I just really I'd like Di to explain why we don't use net as opposed to gross, because at the end of the day, what people have, it's net what they have in their pay packets or what they have to be able to spend. So by using a gross example seems to me misleading. Also, I must say that having read the paper, it's quite depressing that 50% of the people in your survey here couldn't even afford a two-bedroom home. And I'm looking at the rents there, and I guess I'm out of touch because I am a homeowner. But I was surprised at how high they've become over the years. And if you take an average of just the £15,000, I have many people that I'm aware of that £15,000 is not. It can be only just over £1,000 take home, and if the rents are £500 a month, 50% of the rent, 50% of the income has gone in rents alone. So, it's quite disturbing to see that the rents are nearly as high as the private rents. Thank you.
Who would like to ask? Di, thank you.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions there then. One is relating to the use of gross incomes rather than net incomes. The work that I'm presenting in the summer will take account of net incomes, but I'll explain why we started with gross to begin with. The main source of data for household incomes is the source which is referenced in here. This is across the borough, which is CACI Paycheck, and they use gross household income. So that gives us, to begin with, a very sort of stable income source to look at. In terms of other councils' approaches to affordability modelling, gross income tends to be used because it avoids the assumptions that need to be taken with regard to tax, national insurance and other expenses. And I've done a small amount of modelling around what a typical tax or national insurance deduction might look like. And it varies so much as incomes increase that it's a very complicated assumption to add into the mix. I guess that it's one of the caveats to modelling in this way that there will always be deductions to be taken into account. But it helps to avoid the issue of trying to model something that is so complex that you start to lose the thread a little bit of any sort of parity between one household group and another. But as I say, I will be trying to pick that up in the Ishmael presentation that we do to committee in the summer. I think it came up at the Housing Allocations Policy Workshop, the issue of net and gross. And so for that reason, I've started to do a little bit of work around that. In terms of housing register incomes, they are self-declared. So again, I've made the assumption that they are gross incomes. And I think that gross incomes are the way to go. Albeit looking at the sensitivity testing, it does say there's going to be an issue if we're taking 33% of somebody's gross income, then obviously there are going to be, there's less margin for deductions for tax and national insurance and other expenses. So allowing for that, gross incomes does give us a more stable comparator to use across the board. In terms of the issue of rent increases and housing cost increases compared to incomes, yes, that's something we picked up last year, looking at the increase in average wages, increase in wage levels across the last decade, compared with increase in house prices and also the increase in rent levels. And this isn't just the private sector, it's an increase in rent levels across all sectors. What I'm going to try and do in the summer is show where those rent increases are occurring, because it's not necessarily the case that all property sizes and types are increasing at the same rate. There is some subtle distinction between the smaller properties and the larger properties, and I'm hoping to draw that out to show where there are more intricate patterns going on here that we haven't previously seen. But yes, you're absolutely right. The increases in incomes have been slight compared to increase in housing costs generally, not just rents, but also very obviously house prices as well.
Thank you, Di.
Right. Councillor Peach, please.
Thank you. Just following on from the discussion around rent levels, I just wanted to understand if we offered the grant at the said level to provide social rented levels, would that rent level or that rent product be protected going forward, or could there be a conversion at some point or a change in that product on a change of tenancy, for example?
I think that's subject to the the legal agreement and the grant conditions that you would be making as part of that proposal. So if the proposal was, we want it to be social rent for 10 years and then we will convert it to another 10-year, you could work that into the feasibility and it would have an impact on the initial grant rate provided. Equally, you could also restrict, you could restrict it by whatever means you want, because you would be writing the funding conditions in essence.
Okay, thanks. So all I'm trying to understand is, I know there's an indicated figure of 50,000, but in fact, if the council or we decided that we wanted social rent forevermore, there is potential in order to make your financial viability to match up, that it may actually need to be a bit more than that in order to keep that forever, for example. It's not, nothing's fixed in stone. You'd have to work that out before we understood that figure, because I just want to be careful about selecting a figure tonight that we hang on to that in fact is not reality.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair comment. I mean, it's certainly not kind of an undertaking. Those are the broad figures from the previous grant programs that we operated within. I think what we'd like to do is work with officers in terms of looking at perhaps a range or a sample site selection to look at what those figures would be on a range of house types and a range of scenarios.
Okay, thanks. Oh, a couple more, if that's okay.
Yeah, carry on for a moment.
Get rid of that one. And earlier on, there was a discussion about not building enough affordable housing, which I think there's a general agreement on that. We have our target of 300, and we know that wasn't achieved. But can you give us and I don't mind who answers it, anyone can if they like, as to indications that, what stifled social housing building over the past 2/3 years? Do you think BDBC and Sentinel could have done any more? And the final part of that is, moving forward, do you see the economy improving?
I think hopefully we could have three different answers, so I'll ask anybody who wishes to speak, starting on the left.
Yeah, I think partly why we saw a drop-off in overall development was the kind of economic factors and the conditions around 2008, 2009, 2010, where the major house builders, there weren't purchasers looking to buy the market housing, there wasn't access to credit and finance facilities for the larger house builders. And I think, as you can see from the range of sites that have been indicated coming forward in the future supply, a lot of those are being taken forward by major PLC house builders. So obviously any drop-off in access to liquidity or purchasers being able to buy those homes means that typically they stop building or they slow the process. And equally, that tends to trigger a slowdown in the number of homes and planning applications being brought forward. So you then end up with a lag as the conditions improve to actually generate new housing. And I think alongside that, there was a change to the national grant regime as well, which meant that I think in the early signs of the recessions, housing providers were able to access grant and able to kind of keep momentum on the delivery of new homes. But actually, that wasn't the case throughout the whole of that period. Funding rates changed, and as I say, there was a gap of planning permissions coming through the market as well. But it's not an issue that's unique to this district, which I think was the last question.
Thank you. Does anybody else at the top table wish to answer? Thank you very much. Councillor Beerman, sorry, you finished, Councillor Peach.
Yeah, there's just the other element. I mean, obviously, I'm taking from what you're saying, actually, there's nothing more that anybody could have done. It was just a whole set of circumstances that led to the house building numbers just not being met.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think, I think people were kind of surprised a little bit by the rate of decline and the issues that we faced in the marketplace. And certainly we're looking to control much more of the development ourselves now in terms of our reliance on house builders and that market exposure. And so there's steps that we're taking to our development strategy and approach to try and make ourselves more resilient in the future should, similar scenarios arise. But, yeah.
My colleague has a list of speakers. Councillor James, Baker, then Councillor Bierman. Councillor James.
If I follow on from that, if I had come along to you as a cabinet member and said to you, okay, I've got a big pot of money, I can see in relation to what's coming along, the government stopped our funding in relation to the HC, it's all changed. I want to offer you this money. I also want to offer you these 3 sites. I want to do some regeneration in these areas. And to do that regeneration, I want to ensure that it's viable. I'm going to offer you this site. Would you have found ways to deliver and to ensure that I was going to deliver more than 40 affordable units? Could you have delivered units for me at that time if I'd done that?
Yeah, I don't think there's any kind of problem that a whole load of money won't in essence fix. And yeah, if anybody was able to turn around and go, here's a site with planning permission and here's the money to build it, yes, I think it's.
So as a land-rich borough and a borough with considerable capital, if I was to come along to you as a provider and say, can you help us? We're not going to meet our target. There are these constraints. Could you have helped us to up our housing target?
Yeah, I think in essence the simple answer is yes, and we'd be keen to work with you moving forward.
Mike.
Sorry. I just want to pick up on some of the tables, Di, within your... It's on page 35 of 49. Is that telling me that for those people on £80 a week, there's 35% of families that cannot afford that rent? A third of... Is that what that's telling me?
Now, what it's saying is, based on rents of a certain level, from £80 per week to £220 a week, according to incomes of households on the housing register who declared the incomes, that a certain percentage can afford that particular rent level. So, for example, at £80 a week, the percentage of couple households on the housing register who could afford that, who were not able to afford that, would be just over 30%. The percentage of families who would not be able to afford a rent of £80 a week would be about 35%. But the percentage of single households who weren't able to afford that rent would be much higher, at nearly 70%. That's what it's saying. And as you go towards the right-hand side of the graph, the rents get higher, and the proportion of households on the housing register who cannot afford the rent will increase, which is what you'd expect for the normal population as well as the housing register.
So picking up on that point, if I could just ask Sentinel, so if you look at that example that Di just gave us, what would be the rents for that group of people? So if there's 70% of people that couldn't afford a rent of £80, what is a rent for a single person on average? I know you can't give me or for a family. Can you give us those sort of those figures so we have an understanding of cost?
Yes, you can answer, please do.
At the back of Appendix 2, we have included a range of rent levels. Page 43. Page 43 and 44, I think, are showing that there is no one typical rent for a one-bedroom property. There are going to necessarily be a range of rents. Included in the tables here are samples of 3 different databases, if you like, of rents. The first table under social sector rents is the rents that we used for the viability testing, the Three Dragons viability study. Then the table at the bottom of page 43 is a summary of the rent levels that have come through our choice-based letting system. So those new and relet properties that have come through choice-based lettings in the last few months. And then on page 44, there's a table which is produced by the HCA in one of their data sets, which shows the range of RSL rents across the borough for different property types. So that gives those 3 tables give an example of the sort of range of rents that we're seeing at the moment in Basingstoke for RSL properties.
So on that basis, if you look at this ratio that we're looking at, this 30/50% ratio, what is that telling us? If we wanted to go for a 30 to 33% ratio on somebody who's earning, or in relation to the £80, or some of your findings, could you tell us what is it telling us?
You're talking about the sensitivity testing, whether we should go for 33% or 25%. Is that right, Liz?
So really what I'm wanting to know is, clearly your evidence is saying that there's a very clear increase in the number of people, a percentage of 5% increase in those that are earning less than 20%. It's £20,000 in the table, and there are a group of people that can't afford a rent. And we're also saying that we want, or I would like, and I'm sure the national evidence is that we should be looking at a 30% trend in relation to income, in relation to rent. And I don't know if everyone understands what that means in a sense, and it'd be quite good to explain that. What is it then saying? What is this report saying? Can people afford their rent? And how many people can't afford their rent? I know it shows it in the report, but I think it would be good for us to, because we're meant to be having a discussion really tonight, moving away from the usual format of this committee.
I think there's a number of points there that I'd like to pick up. Firstly, the 5% figure. If I understand that correctly, that's based on the modelling that we're showing now compared with the modelling that was shown last year. Is that correct?
That's in relation to your table on page 46. It shows that from 2011 to 2013, it was, if you look at the graph, the first 4 sections, and he went up to 20,000. That's a 26% increase in people earning below £20,000. So it's showing that there's more people earning less money in this borough. And the graph above shows that 24,000 households earn below 20k, which is the third of all households in the borough.
Yep. Thank you for clarifying that. I wasn't quite sure what that was referring to, but now I understand. Yes, that's showing the a shift in incomes and earnings compared to a year or a couple of years ago. So yes, I understand that. One thing I should clarify about the modelling so far, and the issue that we haven't talked about tonight, which we talked about last year, and that's the current effect of housing benefit in mitigating some of these affordability problems. I know we haven't talked about it, I haven't modelled it so far, it will be updated in the SHMA, but I don't think we should completely lose sight of that it is a protection for some households on the housing register and some households in the social sector and private sector. So I haven't completely lost sight of it, but it does provide financial support as it's intended to do. Yeah.
So on that point, we're building housing, and I know that some people in this borough have concerns about us building the number of houses we're building, but the houses that we are building, we're building that people can't afford to live in, but the only way they can afford to live in it is we actually top it up with housing benefit. Is that what you're saying? And clearly the evidence is showing us that.
What I'm saying is I haven't modelled housing benefit at the moment, but we know housing benefit is there to help people on low incomes, so we can't completely take it out of the equation, although one of the reasons I haven't modelled it is to show some sort of parity between the household groups without adding housing benefit as an additional complication at this stage. But just to make the point that it is there to support people on low incomes. But I think you wanted me to explore the issue of the 33% and exactly what that means. As we've discussed earlier, in order to try and get some measure of affordability, in order to explore relative affordability between different household groups and different incomes, a rent could be considered affordable, and this is one of the policy issues that I think we need to unpick. A rent could be considered affordable if it is no more than a proportion of somebody's household income. The rates and the proportions can vary. They can be 25%, as they were in the SHMA of 2007. 33% is what we presented last year. 33% is what seems to be coming across as the industry standard. It's what a lot of local authorities use. And as the details of the sensitivity testing in the paper, I think, hopefully illustrates, it shows a balance between the fact that some households, many households, may have to stretch their household income to pay their housing costs if their housing costs are high, and also that households will need to have some income in reserve that's not dedicated towards their housing costs, but dedicated towards normal living costs and tax and national insurance and food and utility bills and so on. If we accept, or if we take an affordability measure as 25% rather than 30% or 33%, then that has implications for policy, it has implications for affordability, and it has implications for household incomes. If we were to go higher than 33% to say 40%, then that also has implications for policy. It has implications for household incomes. And so the 33% recommendation provides a balance between the two, as well as being a benchmark that other local authorities are using. So we're not unusual in adopting it, and we're also providing a good balance between two thresholds that may be considered a bit unrealistic or rather extreme on the one hand. So that's why we're recommending the 33% rather than the other two. But the reason for including this in Appendix 2 is to promote the debate on that. And I've put down some thoughts around the advantages and disadvantages of using all of them to promote that debate.
Can we move on to Councillor Baker, please, Georgie? And then after that, Councillor Bierman.
Thank you, Chairman. And I would echo others in thanking the officers for the wealth of information that we've got in this paper that's in some cases quite surprising. And I was looking at the range of the variability of social rents on the same types of property. And I must say that until I read this paper, I didn't realise that you could have such a wide variation in rent. I'm looking on page 43 or 49 and seeing a one-bed flat is appearing between £86 and £145. I mean, that's a huge variation, and I'd just be very interested in trying to understand why it is such a broad range. And I've got another completely different question which I'll perhaps be allowed to come back to.
The answer to that in relation to that particular table, it is to do with the inclusion of service charges in with the social rent, count. So 145 would be including service charges as well.
Does that answer your question?
I mean, at that level, are we talking about sheltered housing then?
It could be sheltered housing, but it could be other properties where the service charge is particularly at that level for some reason. I can provide more information if that would be helpful.
Thank you. The other area I'd be very interested in exploring further is something that we haven't talked about up until now, and that's with the use of the commissioning output groups. And I would like to really to pose a question to say there's this group of us here who are interested in this subject. This evening we've got a couple of visiting councillors in. For all we know, there could be a load of our colleagues who are watching the webcast. Who knows? But all of the information that we've got here is available through the council's website to those who are interested, or indeed stakeholders and partners who are interested. So what I'd like us to perhaps talk about for a little while is how what opportunities there are for us as councillors, or for colleagues who are not on this committee, or other stakeholders, to track or perhaps have input into the work of the commissioning groups. And I was wondering whether we could ask our commissioning colleagues, our commissioners, to just expand on that a little bit, please.
If you would like, please hear us.
Thank you. Absolutely. The whole process of the commissioning outcome groups has been developed in a deliberate style to make them completely open and accessible. And we are taking the approach that we don't want to say no to anybody. There are a number of ways for elected members and stakeholders, both internally and externally, to be involved in those COGs. And when we are looking at a particular subject area, we contact the officers and to look at the best invitation list so that we can start that dialogue about how to get the right people around the table. Parallel to that, we have an open invitation through group leaders to nominate elected members to attend the particular COGs. What we've said, because there are 22 programme objectives that are set very broadly, deliberately, to think about how you best manage your resources so that elected members can go to the COGs where they can have the most contribution and influence and to help shape the outcomes of those COGs. We have also offered for elected members that we do sessions outside of the COGs and run them perhaps of an evening and mirror some of the work that we're doing through the daytime run sessions. We are also making all of the documents both available internally and externally through the website. We've offered to do separate meetings with stakeholders who can't attend the daytime meetings, and those can be either through a board that people sit on that's relevant to that particular COG, or through myself and the commissioning team coming along to meet people to have a specific session around what part of the COG stage we're at. We are also open to any request, and as long as it's viable within that COG process, then we'll try and meet all of those requests where possible.
Before you take, could I ask Councillor Reid to oh, sorry, Tracy was like to comment.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, one of the discussions that taken place between housing and commissioning colleagues is the fact that whenever we have any housing topics up for discussion, members are particularly interested in, for example, any workshops that we run are really well attended and in input to. So we've already had that discussion about how we can include at its widest any member or any stakeholder that wants to be part of that process. So we could run a series of workshops. I know perhaps you don't like that terminology, but along those lines. So we've already had those discussions.
Councillor Reid, you want to add?
Thank you, Chair. I just thought it'd be helpful, as I've been serving on the first COG, to just give you a very quick member's perspective on that as well. I found it incredibly helpful. It's a very open and flexible new way, really, of talking and discussing and trying to get us to a different position on whatever it is we're discussing. The first one that I'm on is about the arts, but you know, it's a flexible system that would work certainly for housing and anything else that comes forward for the COGs. Also means that you're having open discussions with all sorts of other stakeholders and groups in a very informal setting, and different things arise from it which can then be taken forward. So I think for it to enable us to, I don't want to say think outside the box because that's terribly cliche, but that is really what we're talking about. It enables us to take the discussion forward and to come up with ideas that perhaps we hadn't even considered before within the formal setting of the council. So I found it very, very useful. And I think for something like this where we're trying to find new ways forward, it would be very helpful.
Councillor Baker.
That's really, really useful. Thank you all for the contributions on that. So am I clear then that all of the paperwork and everything can be tracked through the website? Yeah. And
For the sake of it, there was a nod from both of them.
yeah. For the record. Yeah, great. Thank you very much.
Councillor Bierman.
Thank you, Chair. I also say thank you for the diligent work in getting the facts together, though in some respects the facts are not helping where I would like to see things go. But can I just be quickly parochial and go to the portfolio holder and the famous chart, if I can get back to it, and whilst I'm getting back to it, just grumble about the fact that we're still referring to Sherfield Park. But putting that aside, the portfolio holder suggested that the delivery figures are robust because of planning permissions and so on. And to the best of my knowledge, the Development Control Committee rejected Razors Farm. So you therefore lose about 200 houses. So I can't see how that could be robust. It could, of course, be that the inspector perversely overturns the decision of this council and rejects localism. But let's assume for a minute that localism is for real. Then what happens about those 200 houses?
I did explicitly say that some would fall by the wayside. In the first year, Razors Farm is only 60 houses, so that's 60 for that year. Currently, we're losing 3-0 to the planning inspector. I personally expect us to go on losing, but that's just a personal view. But as I say, we have discounted the ones that don't have planning permission. We've discounted heavily in working out whether we're confident we can get over 300. The ones that have planning permission, we've discounted rather less heavily because we think after they've gone to all the trouble to get planning permission, particularly the ones that are going to appeal, we're pretty confident they're actually going to build the houses. So that's what we've done. So there's, you know, that's but even if you take out the 60, you're still well over 525 less 60 is still a long way over 300.
Trying to retrieve them might not be so easy because other things, as you say, might fall by the wayside. Okay, just putting that aside then. For me, one of the key paragraphs or clauses in the original motion, which for benefit of others appears on page 17 of 49, is 6. And though there's a lot of information in the report, I'm not sure how we're getting close to 6. And whilst 6 might be a discussion point in the COG, others have said why that might take a little while. Can I have an explanation of how, in a rapid time frame, one might be addressing 6? Do you want me to read it out for the benefit of those that might not have it in front of them? I'll just quickly say that the council actively consider establishing a local development company stroke social enterprise, working with our housing partners and preferred developers to deliver Basingstoke affordable rented homes. Thank you.
Who would like to answer?
In terms of item 6, the key for me is the last part of that sentence, a Basingstoke affordable rent. And if you listen to the discussions that we've had in the room this evening, I think there's a whole variety of opinion about what need might be, what affordability might be, whether there's a need for any kind of subsidised provision across the borough, and indeed whether there would be a need for a Basingstoke affordable rent. Leave aside the delivery mechanism.
If I may, Chair, I won't insult you by saying that's a political answer, but for me, the crucial part of that sentence is not the first bit, but is not the last bit, but the first bit, and that's the bit that I really would like to see us addressing, and that is about a local development company. So, I mean, if you're saying, I think you're saying that isn't addressed, which I therefore hope we can address in the debate, Chair, in the ongoing part of the evening.
I think Councillor Golden would like to come in here.
Just so that the officer doesn't get accused of saying something political again, although I think that was an unfair criticism. I think what that exchange shows is there's two elements to there. Are we actually interested in setting up something to ensure the delivery of more housing, or are we interested in setting up something to deliver housing at a cheaper rent than will happen if we leave it to the RSLs? Now, I think they are different issues. And I think the officer's answer was very clear that we are still, there's a lot of uncertainty, there's still a lot of work to be done as to what is meant by affordable, and I hope to get a chance to make a comment on some of the earlier exchanges in a minute. So, I mean, I think we need the further work that we've been promised in the summer before we know what we mean by affordable. In terms of whether we just want to make sure that more housing gets built, my personal answer so far is it's all happening already. It's, you know, we're going to be well on target by next month. It'll be next year. So, you know, the year that starts in 13 months' time is the year by which, on our best projections and being cautious, we would be expecting to be back above the 300 a year. So I'm not persuaded that there's even if we started discussions today and got something set up by the summer, it's not going to get houses built any quicker than 2015-16.
Councillor Beerman.
I have a view on that, but I'll save it for the debate. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Mrs. Reid.
Thank you. I think this is just a quick point of clarification with Di, actually. When you were talking about the 33% measure of affordability, that's without taking into account housing benefit and the effects on that level. Is that correct?
I think housing benefit, we will model housing benefit, but for what I'm getting for the purposes of the motion and any form of council subsidy, what I think you're saying is, if the council is going to subsidise the rent, what should it be, and for whom, and on what type of property? And we can model housing benefit to show who will qualify for housing benefit and who will not, but I still think that that question, in terms of what is an affordable rent, who should it be affordable for, and what type of property should it be affordable for, that question still needs to be answered. Housing benefit will come into the equation, but in terms of the council subsidising a rent in perpetuity or for an extended period of time into the long term, we'd have regard for housing benefit, but it wouldn't necessarily be something that we would model into that equation to work out what was going to be subsidised. It would be a piece of information that's sat to one side, but it isn't necessarily the key question that I think you're wanting answers to.
Councillor James.
It, page 30, appendix 2, it talks about single people and the trend to having low incomes. It says 75% have incomes under £15,000. It then goes on to talk about benchmarks in relation to rents and says that an RSL one-bed property at around, and it gives you the figure of £95 to 120, that 80 to 88% of single people couldn't afford that. So is there something as an RSL, as a product that you could produce? Because obviously there's a discrepancy in relation to the people on the register that haven't got the income, they're on a very low income, they can't afford the rent, we could possibly top it up with housing benefit, but we're trapping people in housing benefit. Is there, are there things that we could do to accommodate young people? We've got to be mindful of the changes in relation to housing benefit. Anyone under the age of 35 won't be entitled to housing benefit anyway. So as a priority, clearly Appendix 2 is a priority to us because they're not going to get housing benefit. They can't afford the rent. What is it, as a housing association, you may be able to do for us?
I'll ask Sentinel to answer. Could you also, when you're answering, just include a little bit of HMOs and your attitude to them?
That's my one then, thank you. I think in terms of affordability, we've done some similar modelling to that the council has done around which groups of people can't necessarily or will struggle to afford our products. And I think ours pretty much aligns with the officers' work in that single people on the housing benefit and families that are working are the ones that struggle mostly to afford any housing product. What we're doing as an organisation is looking at how we can help those families and those single people, not necessarily in terms of subsidising their rent, but in terms of making them have more available disposable income. Whether that's through training and education to get them into employment, which is obviously the primary objective, or whether it's through identifying times of the year where things are particularly difficult for them, which typically Christmas, school holidays, and around birthdays and Easter, etc. We're looking at an offering where we may be able to provide some sort of we're being very careful not to call it an incentive or a reward, but some type of assistance in order to help them through those difficult times. Whether that is around providing subsidised school uniforms for children during the summer, so that when they're starting school in September, the families haven't had to invest a lot of their limited incomes on those high value items. Whether it's providing food vouchers or support in the lead up to things like Christmas, so that there is more disposable income again. Or whether there are other areas, things like subsidised travel costs, etc., which we can work with some local providers to be able to help us to do that. That's part of our options that we're thinking about at the moment. Specifically around HMOs, we don't have any, I believe. Yeah. We have no intention of investing or starting up an HMO product. We are aware that there are a number set up by private landlords on some of our estates, and certainly, my dealings with Councillor James over the last few months or so has highlighted to me some issues that have been affecting both our customers and other people in the areas. And I think our officers have been working very closely with the local authority as well as police, etc., to try and resolve those problems. And in the main, they have been resolved.
Thank you. I believe that's the end of
Just picking up on
James.
So picking up on that point, and it's laudable, those things that you're doing, but in a sense, a single person, you're having to offer a food voucher at certain times because they can't afford their rent, or, the school uniform is more about families, whether it's a single family, a single parent family. But the reality is, unless those single people live in a shared accommodation, they're not going to get housing benefit.
They do. They do on social housing.
Do they?
Yeah. It's only the private rent.
They don't, right, okay. So they will get housing, sorry, so that's my mistake. But they're not going to be able, without topping up with housing benefit, afford the product that you're delivering. So you're going to have to give them support, this sort of support. Isn't that an area that we should be looking at with our partners to look at what we could do to deliver something that they could afford to live in, so that you don't have to offer vouchers and some of these things? And you may want to do some of that work, and it's great that you do in relation to employment and some of those issues. But is that something, and I don't know, Mike, whether is that something we could look at as an area, accommodation for young people, single people?
Okay. I think the reality is, at the moment, and we know that the gap between available income and affordability is getting smaller and smaller, particularly with benefit caps or benefit increases limited to 1%. The reality is the majority of our customers actually do afford the products that we offer. We have a declining level of rent arrears across all of our stock. Which is contrary to kind of the issues that have been flagged around bedroom tax and welfare reform, etc. But we do realise that can't go on forever. And whilst majority of our customers will pay their rent no matter what, so they may put other things to one side. The problem I think we have as a landlord is we don't know what their other costs are. We don't know how much money they have coming into the family. All we can do is base our intelligence on whether people are paying, and just using sort of fairly general and generic kind of average costs or average incomes across the sector. And I know we've similarly been working with other RSL partners about setting up low cost finance, or lower cost than the typical payday loan lenders. But all that's doing is kind of putting off the inevitable that at some stage products will become unaffordable. Sorry, but definitely the overwhelming evidence is that our customers are still affording or somehow paying for their accommodation.
So what Di
We
is
call
saying,
this the last question, and then we move on to debate.
okay, so what Di is saying is that 30% or 33%, possibly that group of young people, it may be 50 or 60, so the percentage of their rent in relation to income is significantly higher than 30%. And you don't know what that percentage is, and what they may be, they may be going without whatever. And our experience in the ward is that they are going without things to pay that rent. But we don't know at the moment, I guess you don't know, and Di doesn't know what that percentage is of their rent, of their income.
At the moment, it's an unknown, but we will have more information later on. Right, I'll ask Councillor Golding to come in before we move on to debate.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to feed back on 4 of the things that have been said, just so that you can think about these as well. It is undoubtedly true that we are a land-rich borough. A lot of the land is parks and playing fields, and I hope no one's suggesting we build on them. The vast majority of the land is employment land, and whilst occasionally it makes sense to put housing where we have employment land, again, overwhelmingly we need the employment land for employment. So far as I'm aware, the only large site where we are 100% owner that is suitable for housing is Aldermaston Road Triangle. And the reason that's not being built on is we managed to turn down our own planning application. So that's not a lack of willingness on the part of the administration, which leaves many down. And to give land away there at undervalue, you'd need to get the other landowners on board, and that's a matter for a different committee. Secondly, can we go back to the table at the bottom of page 43 that Councillor Mrs Baker's already drawn attention to? Because I think that it does illustrate one thing. I mean, I agree that some of the figures, the upper figures on the are slightly surprising, but it does illustrate very clearly that ignoring the three housing types for either which there's either no record or only one record, which is clearly not statistically significant, in every case the highest social rent is significantly higher than the lowest affordable rent. So putting everybody on social rent would not necessarily be doing them a favour, because in many cases affordable rents are lower than social rents. So obviously the average affordable rent, or the median, whichever the previous table is higher than the average or median social rent, but it's not absolutely clear cut. There are a lot of social rents that are higher than affordable rents for the same properties, so we must be careful on that. Housing benefit, I forget the precise figure, and if Sentinel know it off the top of their heads, I'd be grateful if you'd interrupt, but of the people currently in social housing in this borough, it's either something like 50% or something like 70% get housing benefit.
It's actually somewhere in the middle. So it's around about 56-60%, but that's not suggesting that they all get 100% housing benefit.
So if we were going to subsidise rent levels so that nobody needed to claim housing benefit, we would be subsidising over 50% of the people currently in social housing. If we were to set ourselves a target of having rent levels so that nobody needed to claim housing benefit, we would be spending a vast amount of this council's money in order to save the government money. I'm not persuaded that's a good deal, although I'm sure you'll debate it. And I'm also not, unlike Di, persuaded that figures without housing benefit are terribly helpful. If you're a single person with no children on JSA, your housing benefit is over 50% of your income. So looking at your income by ignoring over 50% of it doesn't seem to me to be terribly meaningful. So I think we need to get to the point where we can bring the housing benefit into the figures, because, as I say, unless we're going to set ourselves an objective of abolishing housing benefit in this borough, the reality is people are going to need housing benefit in order to afford to live in housing in this, because that's the way the system works. And, you know, declaring UDI, we will be a housing benefit free borough, is, to my mind, not practical politics. Which brings us back to the debate about whether we should, which Sentinel I thought asked very fairly, that if we were prepared to put enough money or land into subsidising social housing, it could be made available on a social rented basis rather than affordable rented basis. But I think if I got the figures right, it was something like we would either need to put in 55 to 60,000 per house, or that equivalent value in land, which is still giving up money, and we would lose, was it something like 20 or 30,000 per dwelling in HCA money? So again, we'd be putting in a lot of this borough's money in order to save the government money. And again, I'm not convinced that that is what our residents would want. But I'm sure you'll have a good debate on this, and I will be listening, and I may even change my mind. But I did want to say that before you started. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to indicate if you wish to take part in the debate? And we can have a list of speakers drawn up. Councillor James, Councillor Peach, Councillor Bierman. Well, we'll start with Councillor James.
Following from what Councillor Gordon said, in relation to Aldermaston Triangle being identified as a site that or a potential site that we have, and it's in the Appendix 1, and it identifies 40 units there. I just remind members that it's not even in the SHLA. It's our own site, and it's not even in the SHLA, so this is going to be coming forward as a windfall site. We do have an amazing piece of land that we bought to build housing, and it's called Down. You know, there's lots of opportunities. I'm sure there's very few places in the country that have such a large piece of land that we could do some amazing things with. The motion was clearly, as a Labour group, we have real concerns that we are not meeting a target of 300 units a year. We're really far short of that. And for the last 2 years, we've only delivered 13% affordable on all of our sites, which is damning, really. And I think that needs to be looked at. And I do hope that if we get a scrutiny committee in this council, that's a piece of work that we'll look at. But I mean, really interesting figures, interesting stats and information for us. I think it's just part of a picture, but it paints a concerning picture of people that can't afford accommodation. Of course, we can top up with housing benefit, but the reality, I thought, of this government is that we were going to move away from housing benefit. We weren't going to be trapping people in housing benefit. This is what this is going to be doing. They're going to be trapped into housing benefit and unable then to move freely from that. It makes it very difficult for them to move. But it's something that we should look at, and I think we should be looking at that in relation to the strategic housing market assessment that comes forward and the information in the summer. This report is now, the recommendation is that it goes off to the COG. The COG doesn't meet until the end of November. That's the first meeting where it actually looks at an introduction. The second meeting is on the 17th of December. If it's anything, if you look at the COG for homelessness and bed and breakfast, there's 43 members to date going to be invited to that meeting. And I just think if we're looking at the actions of the motion, how are we going to achieve that with that many people around that table? We clearly want to deliver on this agenda. Is not to say that we can't have debates about some of these issues, and I welcome a partnership meeting that would look at some of these issues with probation. I'd like to look at with probation what we're doing in relation to ex-offenders coming out of prison, and how we ensure accommodation for those offenders. And there's lots of things that we could talk about as a cross-party group of people, and what we could do to prevent homelessness, or how we can reduce the number of people that are homeless. But if we actually want to deliver on our agenda of delivering affordable housing, I want to up the number of affordable housing that we're delivering, but also the cost of that, to ensure that people that are living in that accommodation can afford to live in it. And there are very concerning groups within this report that are obviously struggling to afford accommodation. And what's also exceptionally worrying is the income that many people on our register have. The report is a massive piece of work. I don't think it's going to be achievable to do that within a COG. And if it is going to be achievable, what is it that we want as a group, and when is it going to come back with answers? And I don't think it's acceptable that we wait, for the first scoping meeting will be the 17th of December. I want action. I want things done. I don't want things delivered. We have money. We have a commitment from partners to help us to address this issue. We can do something about this, and I don't think we should be waiting. And I don't think that we should be waiting for partners to be offering food vouchers for people that live in their accommodation. I applaud you for doing that, but I just find that terribly worrying that we're in a situation in such an affluent borough that we have people that are living in accommodation that are reliant on their landlord to provide food vouchers. I think that says something. And we have examples within our ward of people that are really struggling. And clearly you can't identify what percentage of their income they're spending on their rent. But the reality, when you see how they're struggling to live, whether it's that they go without things, and many of them are going without a lot of things, I think it's something that we should need to look at. But I don't think that some of our strategic partners in housing are going to be happy to sit in a meeting with 40 or 50 people, with lots of this information will be very sensitive, confidential information. And I'm sure that Sentinel and Swaveling and Sovereign and all of these different groups, from my experience of when I had a strategic housing partnership board, wouldn't even discuss it at that level, are not going to discuss these issues at the level that we're implying the COG is going to be, because they wouldn't do it at a board level where we had the strategic directors sitting around a table with each other. They weren't prepared to do it in that forum. And I think that you're misleading yourselves and us as a committee to think that we'll be able to achieve this. And I want us to achieve outcomes, and it's not going to happen in that forum.
This is debate. Could I just ask you to clarify? If I got it right, you want more affordable housing built. We also, on lots of us sit on other committees, we've already got a council policy of the percent. So does that mean you therefore want more houses overall built? Because we sit on other committees and we've agreed other principles elsewhere.
As a Labour group, I mean, as a administration, you've committed to delivering a target of 300 a year. You haven't achieved that, and in the last 2 years, of those units that were built, or all those houses that went forward in this borough, only 13% of them were affordable, whereas you'll have a target of 40%. As a borough and as a Labour group, we want that target to be higher, and we've said that we want it higher. In P&I that we've said it. Your local plan is saying 40%, and of that 40%, you're saying that 70% of that should be rented. We want that to be 70% of that should be of a target rent. We've met with, at the moment, Oxford, Lambeth. We're now in discussion with other boroughs around this country who are delivering against a target and a local plan of delivering social rented. That's what we want. They've told us it's achievable. They're very happy to work with us and show us how they've done that. They're very happy for our officers to go along, and so they can show you how they achieve that. And I think that we need to do that. I think it's really important we do that. So our agenda is more affordable housing that people can afford to live, a target rent, and we want us to be delivering as many as possible. We have a housing register, or people on the housing register at the moment. I think it's over 6,000 people on our register at the moment. We have 6,824 applicants on our housing register, and this has increased by 719 applicants from January of 2012. It's an issue. We've got to do something about it, and this is what this committee was about. And I think throwing it off into a cog that's not going to even meet until November is not the answer. We want action. And we have an executive member with an executive function. We have money, we have land. Make it happen.
I have a list of speakers. I would like to come back myself, but I'll go through the speakers we've got already. Councillor Peach.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I'd just like to say that I think there's some excellent work that's been done here, and there's also some excellent work that's been done with the partnership working between Basingstoke and Dean and our partners in encouraging affordable housing to come forward. And obviously on the report on pages 21 of 49 through to 22 of 49, it indicates some of those efforts that have been made to date. I'd also like to comment on this concern over the past 2 years, and I think it's clear that during our questions we understood that everybody has done what they could possibly do in an unprecedented economic turndown. And I think what we've got to just accept that no matter how we add this up or whatever political element we want to add to it, the fact of the matter is there were things that were outside of everybody's control that changed and had a massive impact on affordable housing coming forward. However, it's encouraging to see on page 30 of 49 to see that moving into the future that there appears to be some pretty decent, concrete and confident evidence that suggests that we are going to meet our target and perhaps even go beyond that target into the future. So that to me would suggest that there are plans in place, there is forward thinking, and things are happening. And my final concern is there's been a lot of talk around what type of rental product we should have, whether it should be affordable or social, and if indeed social is even possible. My concern with that is people's circumstances change over a period of time. Now, if we perhaps put grant funding into a property that's going to be built and in perpetuity will be held as a social rented property, that in itself is one thing. However, people's circumstances change and perhaps their income over time may well go up. So, rather than, I would suggest, investing in a property or a group of properties, the bricks and mortar, perhaps we should look about what properties and what bricks and mortar we invest in. So if we said we feel social rent is something we want, perhaps there is something on the lines of housing or people in circumstances that for whatever reason may not change. Now perhaps they may be severely disabled, for example, and the prospects of them working in future are going to be massively restricted. And so therefore there may be some logic to apply, if it's possible, of grant funding to a property like that. So therefore one could argue whoever moves into that property and whenever they move into that property and whenever it changes tenancy, it will always be of a lower rent for someone that is absolutely in need. Because I think we've also established that if we do a broad brush across all stock and we try to aim for social rent, we actually lose out on funding from the HCA and we end up forward funding all of that. So I think just to focus in and say we need social rent, and we have to be very, very careful that we don't find ourselves in a situation where all of a sudden we've solved all of the issues at the expense of Basingstoke and Dean's finances and the taxpayers' finances in order to facilitate one very specific part of the housing market. As I say, I'm not saying any of these things are wrong, but I just want to throw a caution to putting all our eggs into one basket, basically. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bierman.
Thank you, Chair. As I said before, I felt the information provided is very useful. The only thing that it doesn't do for me is, and I suspect for others, is provide a clear answer in terms of affordability versus social rented and so on. So let's put those terms aside for a moment and talk about affordable with a small a, if you like, something that is genuinely affordable, and across the piece agree that that's really what we're trying to achieve by whatever means. The portfolio holder has been very helpful in explaining that if we choose the wrong type, we might lose out in terms of who's paying in the end, whether it be us or central government. And I'm all in favour of central government paying. I suspect I'm not alone in that. So let's spend some of our energies, I'm not talking about tonight, but generally, in working the system, which is what these highly paid bankers do, don't they? They get millions for working the system. Perhaps we can save millions by working this system to the benefit of not ourselves in person, but the council taxpayers of Basingstoke and Dean. So that's what I'd like to sort of think of as the overall objective. Where I feel we are missing out and where I'm going to have to disagree with the response from the portfolio holder to my earlier comments on clause 6 is that it might not be an answer. And I emphasize I'm talking about the first part of clause 6, i.e. That we consider establishing a local company. It doesn't need to put everything else on hold. All that means is that we look at, that's what it says, consider establishing. In other words, gather the information and see how that might be applied. Now, that isn't going to happen in 2 weeks or even 3. That's going to take a little time. So it might have to run us alongside the other things we do. But the longer we leave it to start, the later it will be that we might gain the benefit from so doing. So I think we should be starting to do that because we're not alone. There was a time when one couldn't look at having seeing council investments in housing for a while, but that thankfully has evaporated to a certain extent, and certain local authorities are doing it. And if a cash-rich authority like ourselves can't be doing it, I don't know who can. I think we have a good opportunity. No disrespect to our top table guests here tonight, but at the end of the day, they are intermediaries. And if we're doing things where public money stays in the public realm and can be reinvested in the public realm and used as any council, any successor council thinks is best for the public good, that is a mechanism that I would like to be pursuing. So really all I'm boiling down to is saying I want to see some more consideration given to this possibility of a company social enterprise with the overall objective of small a affordable housing provision, and with a system that uses monies available from central government as effectively as is possible, and uses our local council tax as little as is manageable. Thank you.
Councillor Baker, please.
Thank you. I think I would echo, and I was probably visibly nodding at a lot of what Councillor Bierman was just saying. We have two issues here that are interlinked, don't we? Because we have the issue of the overall supply of affordable housing, and we have, the need to unlock that and to start actually delivering 300 or more, preferably more, social housing units a year, and to catch up on the backlog of the ones that we haven't been providing over the last few years. And then we have interlaced with that the issue of how affordable the housing is. I certainly would agree with Councillor Bierman that where we can ensure that homes are delivered using central government funding rather than our own funding, well, that's good, and that should always be our first choice. But then when you come to look at the wider issues of how we use our own land and our own finances, and to what end we direct them, and I think Di outlined the questions, or was it Tracy? I can't recall, about what kind of properties, or what kind of household compositions, do you want to try and target affordability at? Well, those, it seems to me, are extremely political decisions, and I'm more than happy that we recruit as many stakeholders and outside partners to work with, but that has got to be something that the members of the council can have full involvement in through this committee. So apart from the urgency of trying to deal with the lack of supply of affordable housing at the moment, I am really quite anxious about the proposal that that this is going to go through the commissioning outcome group, which isn't going to be starting work for a while, and I, in spite of what we heard earlier, I'm not sure that gives the whole range of us as even with a small p, the politicians involved, the opportunity to contribute and shape that work. So I've got a lot of concern about that.
Thank you. Councillor Reid now, then Councillor Waldridge.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd just like to, as other people have already done, thank the officers for a very, very thorough piece of work. So thank you for that. I'd also like to echo something that's been said before about how we are actually beginning to work towards our targets of affordability and delivering affordable housing. According to the table in Appendix 1, 2015-16, we'll be starting to get above target and making up some of the deficit. I don't see a way of progressing that any sooner, whatever we've been talking about tonight. I'd also like to try and reassure Paula and Laura again about the COG. There is plenty of opportunity for member involvement, very strong member involvement throughout the whole process. And it isn't 40, 50 people sitting around a table having a debate as we would here. It's a much more proactive, positive way of working with work groups and workshops with partners, and it is entirely outcome driven as well. I don't know whether that does reassure Councillors Baker or James, but I'm just speaking from my experience on the first COG. And also I'd like to agree with the portfolio holder on the issue of housing benefits. I don't believe, certainly my residents would want to see us spending council tax money to replace funding which is there already from the government, existing funding. So I'd be very happy to support the recommendations in the paper.
Councillor Waldridge, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just probably going to echo some of what's been said, to be honest, but the things I wanted to stress, and I won't be long, is I have concerns about this being decided through the COG, and not least the timescales, the fact it's not going to start till November. That is a real concern, because this issue is something that's been debated time and time again by members from all parties at most council meetings, and most members have stressed the need for this issue to be, the importance of it and how much it matters to us as members and to the borough. So, to put it through a COG later in the year, I think it needs emphasis before that. So that's the timing of the COG. I think I've also got issues. I take on board what Councillor Reid's just said there about her explanation of the COG, and that's very useful. But I think debating arts is very much different to debating this particular issue of housing, which, as Councillor Baker said, is can be very political, and it's quite very complex. A lot of what's been said tonight is very complex and involves papers, understanding the papers beforehand, and also then questions. I can't see how that level of specific technical knowledge fits in the same way as maybe a debate on the arts would, but I may be wrong, and I will come along. I'm coming to the COG 2 on homelessness, so I'll come and see if I'm wrong about that. So that's that, and so that's my concerns about the COG. I do think the questions that Councillor James asked Mike over there about the use of land were very interesting, and I'm disappointed to hear that you can't top up an affordable rent to make it, get the value of affordable rent to make it into a social rent. That's quite disappointing that that's not possible, so that we're putting our bit and the government's putting their bit. I think that's disappointing that we can't do that. So, but I do think we need to explore how we can use our lands, and even if we can't use it for social, well, we still might want to use a portion of it for social rent, but we might want to try and at least increase the number of affordable units on the land that we're putting forward. So I think there's a much need for a debate about that outside the COG and to explore what is possible. And finally, going back to the housing benefit scoping, I think it's important to look at that scoping exercise in the summer. So I think to a certain extent we have to wait for that information before we can make proper full decisions. But because that's an important aspect of all of this. So that's kind of what I've got to say really on it. Thanks.
Thank you. Since the COG's been mentioned at least 3 or 4 times, I'll ask the COG professionals to come in and have their say.
Thank you. I'd just like to offer some words around why we are recommending around taking the approach of putting it through the commissioning outcome group. There are some real tangible benefits to taking the approach around commissioning. Included in those are it's a real opportunity to identify new ways of delivering outcomes, and as has been mentioned earlier, our commissioning process is completely and utterly outcome driven, and it is outcome driven based on themes, which is a very different and innovative approach to take. The COG process also provides an opportunity to eliminate potential duplication of services and effort between the agencies that are all working in the same arena. And it also provides an environment for stronger and more varied partnerships to look at things differently. And the latter part around what I'll mention around some of the benefits is around it is looking at a joint assessment of need, so that we are working together alongside each other to look at what are the best outcomes for the borough as a whole. There are, as I've outlined earlier, many different ways for elected members and all stakeholders to be involved, and we would absolutely actively promote that elected members take advantage of the open and inclusive nature of this process right the way throughout, rather than just when options are presented. And within the process of a COG, we go through a number of what I'll refer to as stages now for ease of reference. And that starts with where we look at the definition of what we're looking at, so it picks up the point that has been mentioned earlier about what is affordable. It then starts to look at the whole scope of the area of business and activity that we're looking to address. We then, through the COG process, agree what the outcomes must start to look like, what we are all working through a COG process to achieve. Following that, we do all the information around what's identifying the need, what information we have. And when we have that informed needs assessment, which is a joint need, including all the intelligence that we already have and intelligence that we don't yet have, we then start to look at what's the gap. So when we start to pick up a point that was made by an officer earlier this evening, what's the gap between the affordability? So that is an area that we would start to tease out and look at what that means and what it means for Basingstoke. We then go to a stage post that where we've done that gap analysis, where we spend a considerable proportion of the COG time looking at what are the options. So how do we currently provide that service now? Is it meeting the need? So is it fit for purpose or not? And what does that mean in terms of options of being innovative and doing things differently, and looking at all the available options that are available and sense checking those against, is that reality or even feasible for the borough of Basingstoke? And it's at that point that we take those options through an appraisal process that then go back to elected members in terms of looking at what the COG has resulted in, what the suggestions are and recommendations through the options, and that's then for elected members to make those decisions.
Thank you. I'll ask the portfolio holder, Councillor Golding, to come in.
Thank you. I don't want to say as much as I did last night. Just to pick up, to say I entirely agree with Councillor James that none of us should be happy with the situation where tenants are reliant on their landlord for food vouchers. But just to repeat the point, many of those tenants will be receiving full housing benefit. If the rent was lower, they'd still be receiving full housing benefit. The problem is making the rest of the money go round, not paying the rent in many cases. I was attracted, well, let me say the second thing. 2.3 of the recommendation is that the SMART update is presented to planning and infrastructure and then goes on to the COG. I think there was a general consensus that we do need DI to do the further affordability work. And I think you might like to consider whether you want to get yourselves invited to the P&I that evening, or have something in this that makes it clear that you're going to get a chance to discuss that work before it goes to the COG. So you don't have to wait, even if you agree that a lot of the work will be picked up with the COG, and I'm not sure you're going to agree that, but if you did, you might still want to make quite sure you had a chance to discuss DI's work in the summer before it got to the COG. So I hope they're not going to shoot me on the left there, but that seemed to me a sensible thing you might ask. The other thing is I was attracted to Councillor Bierman's attempt to express item 6 in a way that we might all feel a lot of sympathy for. I would draw attention to 2.2, the end of it, which says that the recommendation to work through the COG will not delay, stifle or stall innovative partnership working. So we will continue to work on other options whilst the preparation, before the COG's got the time to pick this up. I've already demonstrated tonight that these can pay dividends. I hope what we've announced tonight will go through. But my memory, and if Councillor Tilbury's listening, it may be his memory as well, because my memory is a long time ago, because I think it was before I was a cabinet member, there was a paper that was discussed at committee on what would be involved in setting up the sort of partnership development agreement that I don't know whether I would be happy to ask officers to see if they could find that and let this committee see it, so that you've got realise that it has been done before, and could decide then whether you want to take that further. And given that the next meeting of this committee, if I was listening correctly earlier, is until July, you're not going to have an opportunity. Sorry? There's one in April. Okay, well, you've got a choice there, I guess. But at the moment, I am very, very reluctant, and I hope you would be reluctant, to put a lot of extra short-term work on officers, because officers have been spending an incredible amount of time over the last 2 months, particularly the senior officers, on items other than their normal daytime duties to do with the floods. And that means that their normal day work is behind. And we need them to catch up on that, because our residents depend on it. So I really urge you not to commission any huge amount of work that needs to be done in a very short time scale. Thank you.
I have Councillor Beerman who wanted to come in, Councillor Baker, and then I will ask Sentinel to put their bid in. Councillor Beerman.
The portfolio holder pangs my heartstrings because I'm going to do just exactly what he said please don't do, but I didn't know when I put up my hand that he was going to say what he was. And I say it, what I am going to say, constructively. Just before I say that, though, of course, whether it goes to P&I might depend on the next council meeting, because P&I might be, in effect, merged with this, and so it might be coming back to P&I stroke H&E plus all the rest or something. So that dilemma might be removed from our shoulders. I was just going to suggest that there be a further 2.4, which does put an extra burden, one could argue, but we are here to make decisions, or to try and encourage decisions and going in the right direction. And I thought we could say something like that officers be requested to actively research the opportunities potentially available if a local development company stroke social enterprise were to be established. Now, that doesn't need to be done tomorrow. I mean, all that one says in brackets afterwards is as soon as possible and resources permitting. I wholeheartedly understand that the officers, particularly in this particular function, have had a massive burden put on them, and totally unexpected one. But I don't see a problem in having this as a request to fit in with the work programme as would apply to any other request. But it is a little more defined than the portfolio holder implied when saying the tail end of 2.2, which is too generalist. I wanted to particularly pick up this thrust of consideration. Thank you.
I'll ask Councillor Golden to come directly back to you.
Yeah, just to say my apologies for assuming that the present committee structure will continue. It was in no way to intend that I have any objections to what I think is being proposed. If Councillor Beerman was prepared to add to the end of what he's just said at the first committee meeting after the elections, so we're not trying to force it into April, it'll come up to the first committee meeting of whatever exists afterwards, and if you're content that it will be not a 30-page paper, but a relatively short paper, because I think the work has already been done somewhere, a lot of it. It's just a question of finding it. I would be content for committee to do that, and I'll live with the consequences with officers later.
Thank you. I mean, I'm certainly content for that addendum. In fact, I was not even expecting it to be quite as rigorous as that, so please put the addendum on, and if the wording is missing, I can either read it out again or pass it to officers afterwards.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Baker.
Thank you, Chairman. I would only say, similarly to Councillor Golding's, not with any intention of casting doubt on the rearrangement of the structure of the council, But if under whatever structure we're working with in the summer, if the planning and the housing issues are being dealt with in separate overview committees, then I would think that the SHMA really ought to go to both of those committees if that is the case, even if it means having a short special single item meeting.
Your comments have been echoed elsewhere, and I did take advice, and the advice was really, can we wait till after the reshuffle or whatever the term is, and see what happens. Can I ask the Sentinel gentleman to come back in, please?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add 2 points, really. One, that I think we're all of the opinion that affordable housing, with a small a or otherwise, is absolutely critical. And we're all trying our best to do as much as we can, as quick as we can. I think just the second point, just to pick up on Councillor James's point about our food vouchers that we're talking about, this isn't meant to be a kind of ongoing subsidy to help our residents live a daily life. The idea was identifying that there are peak times where there's high levels of expenditure within families, typically at Christmas, where families want to buy presents for their children, etc. And our view is that we ought to support them so that they can continue to pay their rent, but at the same time enjoy Christmas as the same way the rest of us do. So it wouldn't be an all year round opportunity.
Councillors, can we please look at page 18 of 49? We have recommendation in there, 2.1, 2.2, 2.3. If we can do that, then we'll take 2.4 and make sure we get the wording right after we've done 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, if people are happy with that. 2.1, members note and comment on the current position. I believe that's been done. Are we happy with that?
Agreed.
Thank you. 2.2, I believe this has been done, actually. Are we happy with that?
Agreed.
Thank you. 2.3, it's been said on webcast, the technicality of maybe a different committee, but for the sake of where we are at the moment, this is correct. Are we agreed with that?
Agreed.
Thank you. Right, now, a slightly more difficult one, potentially 2.4. If I got it right, and please, I'm going to come to Councillor Beam in a minute if I have got it wrong, along the lines of after the elections, officers look at, that's as far as I got. I'm not a fast writer. Yeah. Could I ask the officers to come in, please?
As much as I was loath to write it down, I did. To investigate the opportunities for a local development partnership stroke social enterprise.
Can I ask the portfolio holder if he's happy with that wording?
I think...
Sorry. Yeah, got it right. It should have at the end to deliver affordable housing with a small a.
Yeah, that's what we're all after, I believe, yeah.
May I come back on that one? Somebody got the... No, I'm on. That was in your original statement, but when you read it back, I didn't catch that bit.
Councillor Beam, please.
Sorry, the words, I felt the essence was about right, but it wasn't the words that I actually read out. I mean, I can read out what I read out before, and it's exactly the same. One can work in this question about after the election to start with. In fact, one can just say that at the front rather than at the end. And it says that officers be requested to actively research the opportunities potentially available if a local development company stroke social enterprise were to be established. I didn't actually mention the affordable housing within that, but I mean that was obviously the target of it because that was part of what I was saying. So perhaps those words should also go in to achieve a maximum level of small a affordable housing.
Yes, please.
Yeah, that was the point I was making, because originally you didn't have that on there, and I'd come back to my earlier point that causes a problem because we still haven't defined what affordable is with a big A, a little a, or anything else. So to have that in there, we still haven't arrived at that conclusion. What is it?
Well, the affordable with a small a includes both types. it includes capital A affordable and social, if I can put it that way. But if that causes you a problem, the essence of what I want to say exists without that. But I feel that the target is all about affordable housing. So if it's in there with a small a, it is covering what this debate is partly about.
Portfolio holder, please.
Yeah, could you not put in what you said about maximum, because that implies, who knows what that means? Just to deliver is what we need to do. And then you did when you read it back, you said the word maximum was in what you've just said. We could check that on record. As long as you're happy you didn't say it, that's fine.
At least if I said it, it was inadvertent because it's not on my drafting here. Thank you. I apologise if I did.
I'm going to ask the officer to read what we're actually going to vote on, please.
Sorry, I'm still not clear. Is the affordable bit going in at the end or not?
Dare I say that I would like what suits the officers best, bearing in mind the thrust of the intent. I'm dot first.
That's very kind, thank you.
I try to be, but I do note from colleagues at the front here they would like to see affordable in there, but
So could you actually read out, please, what we've got so far? Yes, Councillor Beam, please.
I'll read it and it won't contain the word maximum, I promise. That officers be requested to actively, was that the word you looked for, research the opportunities potentially available if a local development company stroke social enterprise were to be established.
And you're happy with after the election going into the...
Before that, one could say,
Yeah.
if after the election, blah, blah, blah. And then there might be others wish to add the words that I also put in to provide, that's where the maximum came, a maximum number of affordable small a houses. That's what it was.
So if we stick with the original bit, leave the to provide a maximum and put in after the election. Are people clear? I don't want people voting on something they're not clear about. Yeah, right, we all happy with that? Great, thank you. Sorry, we have the webcast, we might have to go back and check on that. But yes, thank you very much. That is paper C now completed. We'll now, does anyone wish a 5-minute comfort break before we move to paper B? Right, 5-minute comfort break and we'll then be on paper B. Thank you. And thank you very much for the people who've made the effort to turn up tonight. A little bit more than 5 minutes past. It's now 5 to 9. Can we please aim to start in the next 30 seconds? Right, welcome back everybody. Housing and Overview Scrutiny Committee, Thursday 13th of March. We've done everything bar paper B. We're now starting on paper B, which is the subject of landlord repossessions. And as in the previous paper, I'll go to the portfolio holder to introduce it.
Only very briefly, just to thank officers again for the work. I think it's quite a difficult issue to get to grips with and get the evidence for, but they're grateful for what the report they've provided. I would again recommend the recommendation, and just to stress that although this also says take the work forward through the commissioning outcome group, that's not the one starting in November. That's the one that would have already started but for the floods and is still due to start in about a week's time. So there's no delay built into that recommendation in this case. And I think, rather than duplicate work, it is the sensible way to go forward.
Thank you. If it seemed to work well if we did the questions and then debate, same as the old-fashioned way. Any questions on this paper? The officer suggested I would like to speak. Yes, a query from the council. Could you give a little overview, please?
Right. Okay. This report follows on from the presentation to this committee in November, which looked at mortgage and landlord repossessions in the borough. The report sets out the issues that members wanted further investigation on regarding landlord possessions and sets out a way to take this work further forward. The report scopes the next stage of the work, which will be taken forward firstly as part of the strategic housing market assessment in the summer, which will include this as part of the strategic overview of the drivers of affordable housing need and demand. It also outlines how some of the issues will be best explored through the Council's commissioning outcome groups. The part of the work that falls best within the COG's remit has a strong operational and specialist dimension that requires specialist input, discussion and exploration. And it's felt that these issues are best explored and understood and partnership solutions developed through the kind of forum that the COG proposes. And as Councillor Golding said, this COG is imminent, due to start at the end of March. And thirdly, it outlines the work that is already being undertaken by the Community Wellbeing Ofcom on debt and credit. The recommendation is that members note the report and comment on the approach taken, noting that officers and members together will ensure the continuity and the coherence of this work, and that each of the three strands, the SHMA, the COG and the work of community wellbeing, will continue to inform each other and be informed by each other.
Thank you. Now over to councillors. Questions? Councillor James, please, and then Councillor Baker.
Thank you. Like all of your papers, they're excellent. But it is about, no, but they're excellent. They're amazing pieces of analytical work that comes together. But what happened in June of last year, Housing and Environment was asked by P&I to look at why we are significantly higher in repossessions than the national average, and that Basingstoke is 8.1. And the national is 6.3, and that is significant. You came back with some exceptional work in November, but what the committee was concerned about was that you didn't answer the why. Why is it? And that was, if I can just go back to what the committee would like to make a referral to the Housing and Environment Committee as to why the landlord possession claims higher in Basingstoke and Dean and other areas, as outlined, and it goes on. So, and there's nothing against the work that you've done here, but my concern is it still doesn't answer the question why. We're going to send it off to a COG who are going to look at bits and pieces, but that COG are also going to look at many other issues around homelessness, and I'm not sure. I think it's almost if we're looking at this, I think it's a separate issue to homelessness and to reduce the use of bed and breakfast. We may find that this issue in itself would see the increase of bed and breakfast. So I think that the two don't fit together. So and I just think it's an exceptionally complex piece of work because not only are you asking them now to look at referral in relation to repossessions, we're asking them to look at reducing homelessness, what we can do about that. We're also asking them to reduce the number of bed and breakfast. And at the same time, in relation to the next steps, we've also sort of added on the work of the community well-being around debt and all of that. And so I just think I have grave concerns about the COGs, but if we're going to want them to work, I just think they're asking too much of them in relation to this one subject matter. It's far too complex. So that's my first, how do you see that working is my first question.
I think one of the issues is because it is so complex that we do need an approach that's not just one approach but many. And as I say, the coherence of this work will be maintained by the same officers being involved in each of the strands of it. For example, the strategic housing market assessment, the same officers will be involved and the same members will be involved in those discussions as in the commissioning outcome group and in community wellbeing. It is so complex that I feel that the only way we can get a grasp of the causes of homelessness in relation to landlord possessions and eviction is by getting organisations around the table, by getting members and officers and operational specialists from other partnership groups round the table to discuss it. I think it's going to be one of the causes of homelessness that will come out in the commissioning outcome groups. And that's why we're recommending that way forward. If the commissioning outcome group wasn't meeting, then we would be proposing something along the lines of the commissioning outcome group coming together in a workshop style to examine all of these issues. And that's why I say I think there's three strands to this. Debt and credit is coming out through community wellbeing. The commissioning outcome group will be looking at the causes of homelessness and the council and the partnership's response to it. And part of the causes of homelessness are going to be landlord possessions and evictions. And then the SHMA retains that strategic overview that looks at the comparisons between Basingstoke and Deane and other local authority areas. And what I've done in the report is mapped out the scope of the SHMA in that respect, and also how certain qualitative issues that were raised at H&E Committee in November will inevitably, I think, be raised as part of the COG. And that's my thinking around all of these different issues. Yes, it is very complex, and I think there's an analytical issue to it which will come out through the SHMA, and then there's a qualitative issue and a discussion issue which will come out through the COGs, and that's why we've taken that approach.
And in relation to the membership, if you look at the membership, because I'm one of those members, I don't think it's reflective of what you're going to achieve around some of these areas. And so who determines what members are on there? Not members, but the membership rather than members. And I think that's an issue itself. But in relation to the membership, there's really nobody from the private sector on there. And if we're looking at private sector repossessions, if we're looking at that whole area of repossessions, we really need to have a membership of that COG that's going to to be able to address some of those issues in some detail.
In terms of the membership of the COGs, I will have to ask Dawn about involvement of the private rented sector, because I think yes, that is a really good point. What I should also say though is some of the SHMA research includes engaging with the private rented sector, for example, through the landlord survey that's being planned, and also through secondary research in 4.3.4 and 5, which involves talking to other neighbouring districts and also investigating other quantitative data such as court data, the council's own records, CAB and RSLs. So through that, hopefully, we should be able to engage the private sector. But I'll certainly speak to Dawn about involving them in the commissioning outcome group. But I can't actually give a precise answer without her being there, I'm afraid.
In relation to 4.4 of the report, the next steps, are you also thinking that the COG is going to also look at that whole area around payday lenders? Is that what there is an expectation on, and in relation to the credit union and the work of the community wellbeing, is that also going to be part of this?
No, I see that payday lenders and credit union is specifically a part of the community wellbeing focus, which is what was discussed at their last committee meeting at the beginning of February. I see what you're referring to. It's the second bullet point down, and maybe that should have been in the section on community wellbeing. So I apologise for that. But community wellbeing, as you said, is picking up the issue of payday lenders very actively. But I think, as I've said, the COG will be looking at the causes of homelessness in order to establish how you prevent it and mitigate it. And there are some things that you raised in committee last time in November that are very much part of that.
And in relation to the COG, when does that COG feed back to the committee? At what point within that piece of work? And how does it account for, and when will we know what the actions are of that COG?
I think that's a really important point, because having the discussion about landlord repossessions in the first place, you obviously want to see that this comes back at some point, so you can see that the points have been addressed. I don't have the timetable offhand, I'm afraid, with me. I can certainly communicate that by email in the next couple of days. But as I said, the point about continuity of membership of the COG and of the committees is something that is really important to maintain the thread of this all the way through. So yes, this committee should be, through officer and member engagement, maintained in terms of communication of what's happening and what the implications are. And that won't change, that won't stop.
Councillor James, do you have another question? Councillor Baker.
Thank you. Not unrelated. What I wanted to ask about is how we will deal. Sorry, going back to why we have this paper, the issue was to see why are we different in this aspect to other local authorities. And so the primary and secondary research that's listed here hopefully will give us some pointers as to what's happening, in what aspect is different here than is happening in other authorities. And then my concern is that by some mechanism we can delve deeper into that without either diverting the work of the COG or delaying the work of the COG. But on this issue, that is our particular focus, is teasing out that issue and then looking closer at that, even though it's quite probably, it is definitely part of the bigger piece of work that the COG's doing. So can you, help me with that as to how we can try and move ahead with this independently of the whole project that the COG's doing?
Yes, that will be through the strand that relates to the SHMA, which is coming back to, yes, yeah, that's right. So the strategic overview and the difference between the areas that create that inconsistency and the higher or lower rates of possessions, that's going to be picked up through the SHMA. And if that doesn't, if the constitutional changes are such that there needs to be a presentation to one or two committees, then to maintain that thread, as I say, then that's what we might have to do. But yes, it is the SHMA that will be picking up that subtle difference between the local authorities in the performance. So you won't lose the thread of that, whether it comes back to P&I or a differently constituted committee, it will come back and we won't lose the thread, as I say.
Sorry, Councillor Baker, please carry on.
Thank you. In the event that something does become visible at that point, then how do we or our successor committee follow that? I mean, can we progress that irrespective of the COG or only via the COG?
Well, having said that the SHMA and the COG and community wellbeing need to inform each other and be informed by each other, I think there would need to be parallel informing of all these strands of work. So I can't see that the two would ever diverge completely and take their own routes unless they became really considerably unconnected, and I can't see that happening. The SHMA will contain the information that explains the differences. The SHMA will also be picking up the point that you raised, which is in the minutes of the last meeting, which doesn't just say, tell us why, but it also says, tell us what we can do about it. And if that's not addressed in the COG, then I will have to look at how we address that through the SHMA route, and to pick that point up in the secondary research, talking to other councils and looking at the qualitative context of the other councils. That's not just talking about the demography and the housing mix and the housing stock. That would also include what other councils were doing to mitigate that. So it could come down the SHMA route, it could come down the COG route, but they will not be disconnected.
Are you satisfied with that answer?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Waldridge.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a sort of similar question. It's kind of on the same vein, and I hope, maybe just me hasn't fully understood the answer given to Paula, and I'm sorry if I'm going to ask you to repeat some of what you've done. But I suppose my question to you, do you think you've got enough knowledge and information now to put to the COG in terms of this? I suppose I'll take one example and to what I'm talking about. In terms of, like, for example, landlord possessions orders, if that is one of the reasons, one of the reasons for that is because us as a council are waiting for a possession order before we treat somebody as homelessness, for example. Have we got figures about that that's going to be presented to the COG so that the COG can debate that or look at that? Or is there going to be an officer there at the COG who can then go away and find that out and then come back? Or I suppose I'm trying to get an understanding how it works, because, or another example would be, is there going to be somebody from, we might want, for example, Sentinels or Sovereigns figures on, what work they've done prior to going for a possession order with their tenants, and that would be another parallel example. And I would have thought to have that data, the data that you came up with before was absolutely fascinating, but it was not that data that, it wasn't the data that I would have looked at, that would have given me the sort of the whys, if you see what I'm saying. So I'm just wondering whether we got the right information now so that the COG can explore this, I suppose is what I'm asking you. And it's similar to what Paul said, but giving some specific examples. Okay, thanks.
Okay, I think the COG will be looking for primary evidence before it meets. The COG will in itself generate evidence because you've got experts coming together. The COG will also allow for those experts to be questioned, raising the questions that you've asked. And I remember that those two specific questions have come up before, in terms of the continuity that we've talked about, members and officers, those questions will be asked. So I think it's a general process. We couldn't. The best way of finding these things out is by coming together. The best way of generating solutions is coming together. Officers and members will be asking members of other agencies if they have the answers to some of these. And then together we'll also be generating answers ourselves, as well as a detailed look at what evidence is available. I don't think we're going to lose the points that you've made, because one of the reasons the report continues to be so detailed is because we don't lose those points. You're talking about Section 21 notices and whether the advice is for a tenant to not move out before their allotted time. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
The Code of Guidance says that, you know, good practice would be to treat them as homeless at that point, and a lot of local authorities don't do that. Some do, but some don't. I'm not going to say what we do here, but if you think you could, you know, traditionally we haven't always done that. So that, you know, isn't something that I think we need to look at. Because that's where, as I've explained before, it all links to with the deck, because then they've got a county court judgment, etc. So, and so I'm really pleased that you're linking all these reports, but I just want to make sure we've got the right data at that COG so that we can start quizzing the people who are there as to what's going on. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, as I say, I think the COG will generate its own data because it's coming together to work. So if we don't have the data to start off with, the COG will bring evidence together, whether it's statistics or whether it's quantitative data based on what organisations' experiences are. But the specific points that you've made in relation to Section 21 notices and accelerated procedures, those won't be lost, and if we don't find answers through the COG, then we'll have to find a different way to find the answers. But one thing that we've been very careful of in taking this work through, because it could so easily start to get very detailed and the bits of detail could get lost, one of the things I've been very careful to do is to collect each of the points that have been made. And I know that you've mentioned these points more than once, so they haven't been lost. Yeah. And we will bring them up in the COG, and if we can't get an answer through the COG, then we will look at another way.
That is my slight concern with the COG, in that the facilitators, expert as they are in their field of facilitating, might not have the technical grasp of just some of these technicalities that, you know, so it's just so important that they're recorded precisely, and, you know, I suppose that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor James.
Also,
in which case I'll... Sorry.
no, what I was going to say is maintaining the coherence of this work is really important. But if we find that there are small issues that are not being addressed, then we'll have to find a way to get those back into discussion. It may not be the subject of a huge research paper, but it could just be, look, we've looked at this issue, and this is the response, and this is how it fits in. So it's not necessarily that these issues are going to be big studies in themselves, but they are going to be part of a whole, and we'll just have to work through how we deal with them, but we won't lose sight of them.
And no more questions. I'll ask Councillor Golding if he wishes to say anything at this point.
In your past question, I only just wanted to make one. Well, Oh, you got more questions? Go on.
Councillor James.
Thank you. If I can ask that, Tracy, can I ask you to look at the membership of the COGs in relation to what the terms of reference are? I mean, in relation to that you are actually spending significant money from housing budget, that we ensure that that membership is right. I would hate to think that we're going to get to a point that everyone comes together and we aren't sure that we've got the right members. And in looking at that membership, I do have some concerns about that. And the other one is, I do really feel that we should be going back to P&I, because they asked us to do a piece of work, and I think we need to go back and tell them where we are with that piece of work, in a sense.
Thank you. I'll now ask Councillor Goldings to come in if he wishes to.
I didn't want to comment directly on any of the things that have been said, other than to say that the other thing I hope we won't lose track of is the fact that there is a difference between the claims for repossession and the actual numbers of repossessions. Both are important, but they're very different. What matters for homelessness is how many people actually have their homes repossessed. But in terms of unnecessary costs, possibly, and things, we want to keep a focus on what the landlords are doing to start the court proceedings. So we need to keep both in mind as we take this forward.
Councillors, I would ask you to please bear in mind page 10 of 49, which is what we're trying to look at. We now move into debate, yes. Councillor James.
Thank you. Picking up on what you said, Councillor Golding, and in relation to those people that should be at that COG, I think I would like to see this in relation to the CAB, the help desk that sits at the county courts, it sees that amount of work and those people that go through that. And, is it that we ask a judge to come along, one of the judges that looks at the repossessions and what is happening in the courts, those officials that have a real clear understanding of the work of the courts and the significant increase in the number of people that are going through the courts. And you're right, it's not just about the repossessions, but it's also about the claims and the cost of the claim that is then added on to the debt that they then owe, and then how that then impacts on other aspects of their lives. And so it's very complex, but it is going to be essential that we do have the right membership there. And if this is a piece of focus of work, I would have thought the county courts and the judges are an aspect of that that we need to be looking at. But again, I just think that this is a very big piece of work, and my concern is you're setting the COG up to fail because it's so broad. And if you are going to go down the route of COGs, I think there should be tight pieces of work, and there's 6 sessions that you've got to do this piece of work, and it's always impossible to achieve that in those sessions, particularly with that number of people.
The officer would like to speak.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The 6 sessions won't be anywhere near enough. So there will be work that has to take place outside of those sessions, perhaps with smaller groups that then feed back in to those sessions. So we very much see perhaps some of this work being done on a task and finish type basis with a select group of experts that then feed back into the bigger process. That's very much on the cards.
Councillors, do we have anybody else wishes to speak? In which case, I'll draw your attention to page 10 of 49. 2.1, members note the contents of the report. Well, I believe from the discussion, people have read that. That's done, thank you. 2.2, members comment on the approach to this work through the commissioning outcome group. Well, actually, you can all read this yourself. You've got it. Are we agreed that that is? Thank you very much. Thank you for finishing before we need to do standing orders. Meeting closed at 9:25.